Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Keegan, and I'm a designer at Gowalla.
I'm Tim, and I do some freelance stuff for Gowalla. In our talk today, from Click to Tap, we'll have a couple of examples, and a lot of them will be from Gowalla. We're not here to pitch Gowalla, but we do think that if you use Gowalla, your sex life will improve.
So on June 29th, 2007 is when the day the original iPhone was released. And at the time, I had an office a few blocks away from the Apple store. And periodically throughout the day, I would walk over and check to see how long the line was and just talk to folks who were standing there because they were really excited about getting their hands on this new device. And the plan was that the phone was going to be released at 6 p.m. that day. And about 15 till 6, I had walked over and I was standing across the street from the storefront looking at the line and snapping a photo of the storefront. And about that time, it started to rain. And so to avoid getting my camera wet, I ran across the street and stood underneath one of the storefront awnings. And the doors to the Apple store opened and the crowd kind of shifted in. And sort of in the excitement of the moment, I followed the crowd inside. And 15 minutes later, I had impulse purchased a $600 iPhone. And I remember taking it home that night and unpackaging the box, holding the iPhone in my hand for the very first time, and just being super impressed, first of all, like with the industrial design. It was gorgeous. And also with the interface design. And really, that day is what marked the beginning of this new type of design, this mobile design and design for these touch-based interfaces. And it's really kind of opened up this whole new industry for other platforms to sort of get birthed, and Apple is really kind of the headliner for that. And so right now there's sort of like 5 major platforms, and Apple was kind of the first ones to set the standard for that. And so first of all, you kind of have to look at mobile design and sort of think about why you should even care and why you should be developing applications for mobile devices. And really, designing for mobile really means kind of designing for something that's going to be used all the time. And my typical morning routine looks something like this. I'll wake up, grab my phone, check to see if I have any new email, and then I get dressed, brush my teeth, walk to work. And on the walk to work, I usually stop and get coffee. And while I'm waiting for my coffee, I'll pull out my phone again, check Twitter to see if anything's new. Then I'll walk to work, turn on my computer. And while I'm waiting for my computer to boot, I check to see if anybody's played me back in Words with Friends. And so really, we're not going to be using these devices any less moving forward. We're really kind of like emotionally attached to these devices in a way. They have 3 of the 5 senses. They have seeing, hearing, and touch. And it would probably be a little weird if they had taste. I don't even know how that would work. But really, moving forward, we're not going to be using these devices any less. In fact, mobile internet is set to be bigger than desktop internet in 3 to 5 years. And this actually really blew my mind. 1 million touch phones are sold each day. So that's really 1 million people that could be using the software and interfaces that you design. And so really it's an exciting time to be in mobile. And yeah, these are great devices that we carry with us everywhere. And so really, designing for mobile is designing for something that's going to be used all the time in a lot of different contexts.
Yeah, it's even come this far that people see their mobile phone as a thing they carry every day, and it's a way they express themselves with the kind of applications they have on it. And like Keegan said, they get emotionally attached to the device. Like, I remember multiple times where I was dreaming I was going for a swim, and while I'll jump in the water, I suddenly realized, like, shit, my iPhone is still in my pocket. And so in my dream, I jump out of the water immediately, and thankfully, every time my iPhone is okay, which is still a bit weird for a piece of technology.
So really, our talk today is sort of about transitioning our minds as web designers to understanding mobile design and some of the constraints and differences between that. And really, you know, when you think about the desktop computer, there's really one context of use, and that's behind a computer, behind a desk. And with mobile design, you know, there's many different contexts. And so, you know, this can mean anything from being on the side of a mountain to being on the couch at home, you know, anything away from the desk. So when you're thinking about your application, sort of ask yourself, what makes this app mobile, and why would I use this on the go? And so really there's sort of, when you're looking at your phone about to tap an app, there's sort of like these different like mindsets, sort of like, what do we want to get out of this? What's my goal here? And these mobile mindsets were kind of outlined in a book by Josh Clark. He has a great book on iPhone interface called Tapworthy. Really recommend checking it out because there's a lot of great info in there. And so really, these mindsets sort of break down like something like this. The first sort of mobile mindset is I'm microtasking. And these apps are all about getting something done. It's like, you know, you're standing in line, you've got 2 minutes, and you want to complete a task or just get some information quickly. And so these applications are really optimized towards doing that quickly and easily. So here's a look at things for iPhone. And this interface is really simple. It's really optimized for adding a to-do to your to-do list. And the plus button in the bottom left is consistent throughout all of the UI. No matter how deep you are in the hierarchy, it's always consistent. And so when you're thinking about these microtasking apps, really kind of figure out what the primary action is and really kind of optimize for that. The second sort of mobile mindset is I'm local. And these devices these days have built-in sensors, and we should be taking advantage of those. And one of them is the GPS chip. And you can do a lot of great stuff with the GPS. Really, it provides context for, you know, where you are. And Gowalla is a great example of this because our whole mission is basically to inspire people to go out and discover places around them. You know, find a new coffee shop or a new bar or whatever that's around you, and kind of, you know, get people off the couch and out in the real world. And the third sort of mindset is entertainment apps. You know, I'm bored, and these applications are, you know, geared towards providing us with some entertainment. Often in these quick hits of activity as well. And I read a stat recently that said 67% of all apps are actually games. And my personal favorite is Angry Birds. I find it really strangely satisfying to shoot the birds across the screen and hit the pigs.
Something that is consistent across all the different kind of apps you have in the App Store is they're all focused to be used in a very short amount of time. So whether it's a game or an app, you don't feel like it's a bad thing to close down the app. Just a quick game, something you quickly enter something in things, or you quickly check it in Gowalla. They're not meant to be used like for an hour in a row.
Yeah, I think it's kind of important to think of your app as sort of one in a giant toolbox, because I think it's easy as designers to sort of get tunnel vision when we're designing our apps and think, you know, this is the best thing ever. You know, nobody's ever going to close my app and switch to something else. But the reality is, you know, we're just one tap away from closing your thing and opening something else. So I think, you know, you really kind of want to find the one or two things that you can do best and really optimize for those. And, you know, we're kind of, on the web, we're used to kind of designing on these big cinema displays. And, you know, a typical web UI is like 1024 by 768. And on these mobile devices, we have a bunch of different screen sizes and also ratios to design for. So, for instance, the iPhone screen is 320 by 480. And this is like an 80% cut from standard web UI. So it's a much smaller area, and this actually is a beautiful constraint. It really forces us to sort of find focus and pull out, you know, the best stuff of our application. And so an example of this is Flickr. I'm a big fan of Flickr. It's a photo sharing service that I've used for many years. And if you take a look at their web UI, there's like 60 plus links here. There's a lot to Flickr. And then you pull up and take a look at their mobile app, and they've somehow reduced 60 links down to like 4 main links. And you sit there and wonder, how did they get from 60 to 4? And if you look, it's really the stuff that's kind of updated a lot. New photos from my friends, new comments, photos nearby. And so this is stuff that kind of changes often. And this is kind of indicative, I think, of how we're using the web these days, sort of in these quick hits of activity. We're pulling up Twitter and then hopping over to Tumblr, and then we're just kind of here and there. And that's especially true on mobile because we're designing these applications to be used kind of while we're distracted by the whole world in a way. And so these smaller screen sizes has really forced Flickr to pull out the best stuff. Another example is TripIt. TripIt's all about planning a trip and finding an itinerary. And this is the page from my trip from Austin, Texas, where I live, to Ireland for build. And the part about this page that I really care about is when my flight leaves and when it returns. And that part of the page is about halfway down. It's like 2 little text links. And sort of everything around that is kind of UI cruft. It's an upgrade, asking me to upgrade to a Hertz rent-a-car and just extra navigation and whatnot. And then you take a look at TripIt's mobile app, and that information is really just up front and center. Like, this is kind of what I'm after. And so really, what you want to do is sort of figure out sort of the most important part of your app and kind of suck that out and make it up front and center. The interface guidelines for iPhone basically say, show the primary task up front and sort of, kind of reduce everything else to the background. And this is the original prototype version of Gowalla. And our original idea here was to sort of take a digital scavenger hunt and layer that on top of a location-based social network. And so the idea was you would go to a real-world venue, check in, and then you were presented with these little icons that we designed that were like little hidden goodies at that spot. And so we gave this version to like friends and family, and the little blue indicator in the bottom right was supposed to show like how close or far away you were to a spot. And so as you got closer, it would dial in, and then eventually it would change to a check-in button, which you would tap that would basically say, I'm here. But when we gave this to some friends to play around with, it's like they had no idea what to do on that first screen because they never had seen the check-in button. And so really that action was sort of buried. But when we were designing it, it's like, why show a check-in button if you can't use it? Which kind of made sense in our heads, but not actually once we started playing around with it. And so we fixed this in the next version of Gowalla by just showing the button up front. We like to call this guy the BFB, the big freaking button, and it's just a super stupid simple tap target. And if you're too far away from a location, it'll actually gray it out to be 50% opacity, but the primary action is still up front and center. Another example of kind of showing the core action up front is Twitter for iPhone. And this screen is super simple. Type a tweet and then click send. But if you notice, there's a disclosure triangle in the bottom right. And if you tap that, you'll get a grid view of advanced options. And this is kind of a nice way to think about advanced features in your application is sort of tuck them away into these secret panels or extra screens and sort of just focus on the core action and sort of put everything else in the background. And so they've done a beautiful job at this by sort of hiding it behind the keyboard. So it's sort of there if you need it, and otherwise sort of out of sight, out of mind. And so I think the overarching principle here in mobile is just like keep it simple. And this is kind of like design 101. It's like the more information we can remove, the clearer the information we're trying to present becomes. But this is especially, it's really hard to do. It's harder than you would think. So yeah, really kind of focus on the core of your app. On the web, we're used to navigating in these interfaces with our mouse, mice, I don't know what the mice.
Mice.
And
the thingy.
And we can usually hit a tap target within a pixel or two. And these mobile devices we're using with our fingers and thumbs, and our fingers and thumbs are inaccurate. We often, hit the wrong thing, or we're using it with kind of one hand on the go. And so it's important to think about tap targets and sort of what that looks like. The recommended tap target for iPhone is 44 pixels, and that's sort of a good rule of thumb for designing buttons and interface elements. You'll see this 44 pixel tap target pop up like all over the iPhone UI. For instance, in the calculator app, the buttons are 44 pixels high and 44 pixels wide. And then if you kind of dissect the Things app, you'll see the title bar is 44 pixels, the table cell rows 44 pixels, the table, tab bar at the bottom is also 44 pixels. And so obviously Apple's kind of patented or kind of made this a standard, and you'll see it pop up in Android and Palm as well. And so sometimes you need buttons that are smaller than 44 pixels just to sort of balance out the interface. And for those instances, for instance, like the edit button here is not quite 44 pixels high, but the tap target is actually, is actually bigger. It has like some padding around that to provide mistaps, I guess.
Take over here. Just a quick note. In the beginning, our first slide was the little mouse cursor and then the little click cursor when you hover a link. I think it's quite funny that the click cursor, which was introduced by Apple with their HyperCard in 1987, was originally a finger. I mean, after how much? 23 years now, we only now enter the era of mobile devices we control with our fingers. So, just a little nice to know. So, I'd like to know how many people in here have experience with designing mobile applications, either native or mobile web applications? Cool, that's good. Very, very good. So, the first thing, of course, is you want your mobile application to look really, really nice. So how do you do that? Keegan was talking about constraints and how you should limit the amount of features you have in your mobile application. The way I see it is, if you build a mobile application, it's a perfect opportunity to start over with what you do with your website. Your website might have a lot of features. Me? Sorry. Sure. That's my iPhone. What's your name? You want to meet my mother? Can you hear me still? Okay. Thanks. Okay, let's try. I'll try not to move. So, the best way to get to like a subset, because that's what it is, a mobile app is like a subset of your website, is you just make a big list of every single feature you have on your website. And you start scratching out all the ones you maybe regret building or none of the users ever used. So, how to do this is always start on paper or maybe even on just a whiteboard. It's much easier, much faster, much cheaper to test certain workflows of your application and instead of jumping straight into Photoshop. Because you will have to iterate. A lot of the times, your first thought about a certain screen will be completely wrong. So once you get this figured out and you get into Photoshop and you design your beautiful application with native controls, We come to the problem with pixel densities. Keegan showed a photo of all the different mobile phones, and they all have different screen sizes, but also the pixel densities. So I think the best example of this is the iPhone 4. The previous iPhone had 320 by 480, and the new iPhone has 640 by 960. That's like the double, but in the end, the controls on your screen should still be the same size, because, well, your fingers are still equally fat. So I always advise people to start their design for the Retina display iPhone. That way you can get the most details in it. And after that, of course, always comes the job of resizing it for the older iPhone. And the problem a lot of people have is when they start resizing stuff, things kind of turn blurry. Not always, but Photoshop isn't the most perfect application. So the first square would be the Retina display, and the second one would be for the older iPhone. If we zoom in on the smaller one, you see that the edges start to blur. Now, I have 2 tips about how you can try to stay away from this problem, because it's a lot of work if you need to fix all this for all the screens in an entire app. So the first is, in Photoshop, you can set guides, but you can also set up a grid. By default, the grid in Photoshop is just 1 pixel by 1 pixel. But if you tweak it, and you set it like this, you'll have a grid of 2 pixels by 2 pixels, which is basically your Retina display sorted. So when you stick to this grid, you'll notice that, of course, one pixel in the grid is actually 4 pixels in the actual design. And when you go resizing your iPhone application, you will have less cases of the blurry lines. Another tip is just try to use as much shapes and vectors as possible instead of rasterized layers. Because when you go resizing and you have a blurry edge, you can see that's one of the points of the shape. And when you start resizing, it's just very easy to grab the point and to nudge it around on the grid. It will snap to it, and then you have, again, a very pixel perfect element. Another tip when you are designing an iPhone application is have like a scratch file where you keep all the assets you're using inside your application. I use it for buttons, I use it for glyphs, and more. And so, one thing you can see here is the big difference between the Retina display iPhone assets and then the smaller ones. And this is, of course, because of all the different pixels, densities and screen sizes you have. And yeah, it's different for every single phone. And if you start designing a Retina display layout for the first time, you'll notice that this is on a 15-inch MacBook Pro, and it looks huge. So it's very easy to get a wrong idea of the size of your controls, how they will eventually end up on the actual device. So an application I always use is Dropbox. As soon as I design a new screen or I tweak a screen, I will save it as a PNG in a Dropbox folder, and it will automatically sync up into the cloud. So next time I fire up Dropbox on my iPhone, I will have a perfect representation of my static design on my iPhone on the actual device. I can see, I can check out the buttons. Are they big enough? Are they well placed? Another thing is you can just walk outside and test the application in different light conditions. Because a lot of time, the contrast of your app won't be good enough. So collaborate with your developer. I know we are designers, and some of us code, most of us don't, and we can find our way around some CSS, some HTML, maybe some JavaScript, but coding up a mobile application is probably in a language we don't understand, we don't know how to work with, maybe Cocoa. So I've been working with this guy for the past 6 months, and what you should do is you should actually just grab a chair and try to sit next to him on the desk, and you should watch him work, watch him implement your design. You will learn a lot from him, and he'll be able to give you tips. And he will learn a lot from you. Like if he doesn't understand why you do certain things, you can just explain it, and he will tell you, well, okay, that's not possible because of performance, or it can be done in the framework we're working in. One of the tips I learned from this guy is, let's say you want to have this button up in your iPhone application without the glyphs and the text. So I used to think, well, okay, I'm just going to save the entire button in a PNG and we're set. Well, he told me, if you want to keep it more compact, so the app would be more performant and it would be faster to download over mobile, is you take the entire button and you take the right part and the left part, and you just compress it down. And you keep this 1 pixel line in the middle, and that part will be stretched over the entire width. So I was really thankful to learn that from him. So you designed, you sketched out your application to make sure the functionality is good and usability is good. You designed it in Photoshop. You handed off all the assets to the developer, and the developer magically turned it into the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Once it gets into the hands of your customers, either through the App Store or through another mobile store or a web download, you should constantly keep asking your users for feedback, because they see things you don't see anymore because you've been looking to the app for so long. And maybe one customer comes over and it's like, well, on that screen, I don't really understand what I should do there. It's too complicated. But for you, it's like the most easiest screen. It's the best screen in the entire app, and it's awesome. But after 10 people come along and they're like, well, we all don't get it. Well, maybe the first one isn't just a stupid user, and you should iterate, even if you're really attached to the certain screen. This was one of the first versions of Gowalla, and we really liked the deep green design, and it was different. It wasn't that very iPhone-like, but still it had character. Now, what we didn't realize is, well, Gowalla is mainly for going out and checking in at spots and discovering the world, so mostly outside. But it was almost impossible to read the screen outside. So that's the reason we moved to a more light green interface. So you decided you want to have a mobile application for your, to accompany your website. How will you choose between going for a native app or going for a web app? Now, if you go for a native app, you have a lot of platforms you want to support. So why not a mobile app? Mobile apps have the advantage that they're quite easy to build. You could code up the static mockups yourself. You can easily iterate. Instead of, if you make an update, the user just has to refresh the page instead of re-download the entire application. But then again, you also have the problem of performance. Performance is a lot better for native applications, and same goes for the feeling. There's just a big difference between using a web app and using a native app. A native app feels a lot more solid and robust, and you just have more trust in it. So what if you decide to go for a bit of a hybrid? We have a lot of people checking in on Gowalla and posting it to their Twitter. And people checking Twitter on their iPhone will tap a link and this would open. Now, at first we showed just the regular web page you have on desktop, and it would be big and you have to zoom in to get more details. So we decided, well, let's create just a screen especially for these cases. A screen simple, optimized for the iPhone. We can easily change it. It's in the browser, so we don't have to contact Twitter, like, can you build it in or whatever. And it's, for us, this is like the perfect hybrid. So I think, back to you.
So when you're designing native applications, these are apps that you download and are compiled specifically for the device that they're being used on. And these apps are really, really kind of a different design kind of principle from a web app design. And really these are what kind of users expect. to get. And like when you tell a friend to get an app, they don't think to go to a website and bookmark an app. They think, I should go to the App Store or the App World on BlackBerry or whatever. And so really, like right now, the market is really fragmented. There's even multiple app stores sometimes for these different platforms. And so really, when you're figuring out what platform to develop for, you kind of have to look at your audience. And just to completely stereotype these devices will give you kind of an idea for the kind of users that use them. BlackBerry is very like text heavy, a lot of text input. They have great keyboards. A lot of businessmen use them because they're great for email. Palm is very gorgeous UI. A lot of ex-Apple engineers and designers worked on this interface. It's kind of just got purchased by HP. We haven't noticed a ton of usage, but it's a really nice platform and great UI. I think you'll see it pick up going forward. Windows 7 is a brand new platform and phone that just came out. I actually haven't had a chance to play with one myself, but it looks like it has some great design standards built into it, surprising. And Apple, obviously, the iPhone is very sort of geared towards people that are on the go a lot, people that appreciate good design and experience. And so when you're looking at what native platform to develop for, sort of look at your audience. And there are certain advantages that you'll get with native apps that you just won't get with mobile web apps. For instance, if you're charging money, you have to go through the App Store. If you're using any of the built-in GPS sensors like location, you'll want to build a native app. If you're using anything with like the file system, you'll want to do that as well. One of the good examples of this I've seen recently is the Rdio iPhone app. Rdio is like a service for listening to music.
They don't get it over here.
What's that?
They have Spotify over here.
Oh, Spotify. Oh, shoot. Anyway, they have this great feature where you can download music for offline access. And so you can kind of earmark these songs and access them when you have no internet connection, like on the plane. So that's a really great advantage of using a native app. Also, you kind of have the built-in marketing of the App Store and just kind of getting your app kind of up front and in the category that it belongs in. And so really, the point is one app or one website isn't really going to cut it. You really kind of have to design specifically for the devices that you want to target. And users are kind of, they're like, built-in standard controls for lists and select boxes. And you really want to make these kind of feel at home for these platforms. And I think a lot of times you'll see like an iPhone app designed first, and then it'll be ported over to Android, and it looks like an iPhone app UI on Android, and it's really kind of confusing. So I think the point is if you're gonna make the best user experience, you're gonna have to design specifically for the platform. And so usually like a good kind of the approach we've taken at Gowalla is to pick a flagship platform. For us, it's the iPhone, and we sort of use that as the baseline and kind of make our interface decisions there first. And then we'll go down and port them to platforms that are next best, I guess.
So, what did we learn today? So, mobile design isn't a hard thing to do. You just have to keep in mind a couple of things. Try keeping your interface as simple as possible. Make sure people can go through it really, really quickly. And think about in which context your users will be using your app. They won't be at home. They might only have a fraction of a second of time. So again, make it simple, make it fast. People aren't using mouse cursor. Make sure the interface is very optimized and very figure friendly. And if you're going to test your design, make sure to do it in as much different situations as possible.
So yeah, I mean, going forward, mobile is going to be really the next wave of the internet. So designing for mobile is really designing for the future. So you kind of see new stuff being invented all the time for these touchscreens, and it's just a really exciting time to be kind of transitioning from web to mobile design. A lot of fun stuff being developed.
Yeah, I think if you're a web designer now, pretty soon most of your clients will start asking for either a mobile version of the website or maybe even a native app to accompany their website. So be smart, start learning up on mobile, and you'll probably earn a lot of money there. Thank you.
Thanks.